What's up, guys? Four-wheeler Doctor back again. Today we're working on a 99 Recon 250. We're going to do some brakes on it. My videographer hadn't just panned over to the bike yet. There he goes. He's just learning. So what we're doing on this one, the brakes are completely shot. Rear brakes, front ones ain't real good either, but we're going to work on the rear today. Another big thing is the foot lever for the brake is seized up, which that happens a ton of times on these things. I'm going to show you how I'll fix that too. Alright, to start off with, we do have to take the right side tire off of this thing and the hub off of that end. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that tire off, 17mm lug nuts on it, and I believe that hub is like a 27 or either a 30. I'll let you know in just a minute once I get in there and tear into it. So we'll cut the camera back on in just a sec. Alright guys, I got this tire off over here. You want to pull this cotter pin out to get the axle nut off, and this axle nut is a 30mm. I wasn't real sure, but it is a 30. So just wiggle this thing out of here and then pull it off with the impact, and I'll cut the camera back on right before we take these other axle nuts off. Alright guys, before I take these axle nuts off, I am going to pull this skid plate off. There's three 12mm bolts on it, one on this right side, one on the left side over here that faces up, and then one on the very front up here that also faces up. We'll pull that off first just to give a little more room, because we are going to eventually have to pull this cover off. Alright, let me get this off and cut the camera back on. Alright guys, we're going to take these brake cables off here. Your average person would just twist them off, but my carpal tunnel's acting up, so I made this little tool here out of a spark plug socket and two washers. I know it looks pretty crude, but watch this. Look at there, just like that. Actually, I didn't even run it all the way off, but it pulls them right off. Alright, so we're going to get both of these off. Goodness gracious, that thing had 6 inches of thread on it. And next we're going to take the axle nuts off, just like that. This brake lever is leaned forward, way up like the brake's applied. You got to get it close to, I guess, close to vertical here, or a little bit past vertical, maybe at about 11 o'clock position in order to get this brake off. Alright, next thing we need to do is take these nuts off here, these axle nuts. I think they're about maybe a 36mm or something. Normally, your average person just has to use a pipe wrench. Works pretty good. A lot of times these things can be real tight. Well, me naturally made a tool for it. Just took one of these off and bent a piece of metal around, welded it to a piece of exhaust pipe with a socket on the end, and you slide it up on here and take your impact, and it will run it right off of there, as long as it's not too tight. Well, it's pretty tight, so you get the gist of it. Let me get these off and I'll cut the camera back on. Alright guys, got the nuts off here. This thing has a real small washer that's right up next to the nut, and then a bigger, almost fender looking washer is next on there. Pull that off, and most of the time these things have a little rubber, they got a little rubber O-ring in here. I'm gonna have to get a pick to get that out. But the next thing we're gonna do is pull these bolts off of this cover. They're 12mm. Sometimes they're tight, as in this case, so impact won't hardly get them off. But we're gonna pull those off, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I pull this cover off. Alright guys, now we're going to tap this cover off. Got all the bolts out. Got the little O-ring out of the inside there. There is a little pry point here on the back. Sometimes you can get that thing to pry off. What I like to do is just take a hammer and tap this ear up here where your brake lines went. This thing has an O-ring in it, so sometimes it's hard initially to get the pop right off till that O-ring breaks out of the cover. So just work your way around it. The key is to try to get it to come off fairly square, and also just try to get it to come off. Sometimes these things get hung up with the brake in them. I'm hoping this is not going to be like that, but you never know till you start tearing it apart. So what I may end up having to do is get a couple screwdrivers and pry at the top, pry at the bottom, because it's hung, but it acts like it's hung right there at the axle. So let me see See if I can get this thing to pry out. Yeah, see, that's pulling the whole axle out, and the brake and everything. So we're gonna have to do a little work here. What I'm probably gonna do is take this brake lever, the arm off here, and try to knock this back to keep the brakes inside of here. That's not gonna work. I don't know what we're gonna do. Let me take a hammer, hit the end of the axle here, see if I can get this to knock back through, because it's hung up pretty bad there. All right, I'll cut the camera back on this sec. All right, guys, this thing's hung up on here. So about the only, well, it ain't the only way, but the way I'm gonna get it off, I believe there's a little bit of rust in here that's holding that bearing on. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this other wheel and hub off, slide this axle out, and get it out here where I can work with it. Can probably put this plate up on something, hit the axle, and get that to knock through. So let me get this other tire and hub off, and we'll slide the axle out of this thing. Alright guys, I got the wheel and hub off the other side. You can just take and slide your axle all the way out once that's removed. Comes out like that. And then now we need to get this plate here off of the axle. The thing that kind of stinks about it is your brakes are inside of here, and there's a collar here that won't let this brake slide forward. So all you can do is try to knock this off. The thing is made out of aluminum, so you don't want to beat on it too hard because it will break. So let me see what I can rig up to get this thing to come off here, and I'll cut the camera back on when I get something figured out. Alright guys, we had a time getting this thing off. The little sleeve that's in here and the bearing were rusted to the axle, and like I say, it was quite a job. I didn't video it because I wasn't real sure if I was going to get it out, but we did. Ended up taking a nut, putting it back on this end. You can see we actually mushroomed the axle a little bit, but that's a minor issue at this point. Put a nut back on there so we wouldn't mess the threads up, and hit the brake drum here until it knocked the bearings off. And this sleeve, I think both of them were rusted on there. So this is your sleeve, then this slides right off once you get the sleeve off, and the brake drum will slide right off too, but we're going to leave that on there because we ain't doing nothing with it. Alright, so then you got your brake here. These brakes are have no friction material left on them, so just slide those off. I got a new set to put on there. And then also another issue with this thing is this pivot bolt here is also seized up. So we're going to take the 10mm bolt off of here and tap this thing out, take and clean it up with some Scotch-Brite, and put some lube on it, stick it back in there, and get it back moving freely so we can actually get some brakes working. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart, and I'll cut the camera back on maybe right before I take it apart, just so you can see all the pieces to it. So cut the camera on in a second. Alright guys, I got the 10mm bolt out of here. You just slide this arm off of the off of that brake pivot bolt there. It's got some splines in it. You got to kind of work it to get it over those splines. Sometimes you have to pry it off. This is not wanting to slide off too terribly easy, but there it is. Alright, then you got this little indicator washer type thing. It comes off next. And you can go ahead and pull this spring off too, because we're not going to need it for right now. And then we need to get this thing out. It actually has a dent knocked in it that helps you line this arm back up, so you don't really want to damage the end of it too much. I've got a brass hammer that I'm going to tap it out with if I can find it. Let me get it tapped out, and then I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright, so I got the arm out of there. Just a little bit rusty. I'm going to take the Scotch-Brite, clean this up, and put some wheel bearing grease on it, and then we'll stick this back together. So let me get this cleaned up, and I'll show you how to put it back together. Alright, we got the sleeve lubed up, cleaned up, so see it moves real easy now. Going to put this thing back together. You want to put your spring back on first. The spring has a little hole here that it has to fit into, so make sure you get it in that hole. And you got to put this little indicator washer on here. It has a notch cut out of it that lines up with this notch that's on your shaft here. So make sure those get lined up back up. Kind of got to make sure you got your mouth right to get all this stuff lined up. sometimes even when you do have your mouth right, it still won't line up. It doesn't help that I'm about half blind too, so there it goes. See? Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Alright, now so you put this sleeve on, or this arm on here. It's got a dent knocked in it and a dent knocked in the shaft here. You want to line those two up. Doesn't really matter when you first knock it on there. It's the second time, once you get it pressed on a little bit, is when you got to line it up. I'm gonna have to have a hammer again to tap this down. Alright, so now we got it mashed down on there. We need to line those dents up fairly close. Try not to hit your finger with the hammer because it hurts. And about like that. About like that. And make sure your spring is behind your arm here, and this thing's gonna have to go on there a little bit farther because the bolt will not go through it unless you get it knocked on. You got probably a 1/16 of an inch of that shaft sticking out. You have to have it down that far, the bolt won't go in. So now tighten your bolt back up, and then we're gonna go over and I guess go ahead and stick these brake pads in there. And I'll cut the camera back on when we get over there to put those in. Alright guys, now I got the brakes put together here with the springs in them. This little kit I got came with springs and the shoes. Sometimes they only come with shoes, so you have to reuse your springs. But just put them together like this is about the easiest way to do it, and then stretch them over the little stud that sticks out, as well as your pivot bolt. And make sure they're pressed all the way down on there so they go past that little lip as well as past the lip here. See, these aren't all the way down, so you slide them down till they kick in, and there you go. That's how it works. So now what we need is we need to slide the axle back in this thing because we took it out earlier. If you don't have the issues that I had, you might not even have to take this axle out. That was just an extra step. So I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, we're going to slide this axle in here. Look, I'm going to go ahead and apologize on this video. I got this new videographer over here, and if you can't see about half these shots, it is Daniel McNaughton's fault. So y'all look him up on Facebook, add him on Instagram, all that stuff. Don't get him to do video work, because I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's subpar. Alright, so we knock this axle in here. Like that right there, and then put your brake drum back on. And this brake cover back on there, it has an O-ring on it, so you do want to put some grease in it. Got some red tacky here we're going to smear around there to try to keep it halfway sealed up and keep water out of it. So lube that up a little bit, slide it on here, kind of halfway get your bolt holes lined up, and hopefully this brake is going to slide right over. Sometimes these things can be pretty tight on a brand new set of brake shoes. I also cleaned up that axle a little bit with the Scotch-Brite wheel to try to help that bearing slide back on there a little easier. My head might have been all in that video, but it's going on there. Tap it on till we get our bolts lined up. Just so happens I beat it right on there till the bolts were already lined up. So put your 12mm bolts back in here all the way around, and still need to put the collar back on here. I don't know where it's at. So I'll get these 12mm tightened up, then we'll find the collar and the washer and all that other stuff, and I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, next thing we're going to put on there, I got all the bolts tightened up on that, is this little collar here. Make sure your bearings are spaced out like they should be. And then there's also a O-ring. Lube it up a little bit too. Stick it on there. It goes inside of that little collar. Sometimes it helps if you have a screwdriver or something to press that O-ring up in there, because it does have a little recess that it sits up into. So press that in like that. Alright, next thing to go on is going to be the bigger washer here. I'll put a little bit of lube on it too. Slide it on. Then the smaller washer right here goes on next. Then you've got these two nuts, the lock nut and the regular nut. The regular nut has that flange on it. Make sure it goes on there first, and then the lock nut goes on after that to lock it down. Just tighten these things down. I don't know what the torque spec is, but I just tighten them as tight as I can get them, because you don't want these backing off. It'll end up wearing out your ring gear and all kind of stuff. So tighten these down as tight as you can get them, and I'll cut the camera back on with the next step. Alright, we got all the nuts tightened up on the axle here. Now you're going to put your hubs back on, one on the right and one on the left. Put your nut on there, tighten those back up good and tight. There again, that's about the same case as these lock nuts. I just tighten them down as tight as I can go. This one here is a little tough to get on there, because we did beat the end of the axle up a little bit, but it will thread on there. At least it threaded off of there a while ago when we took it off. So let me get those tightened up, and then we will hook these brake cables back up, and we will be ready to start on the brake lever up here. It's seized up. That happens on a lot of these, and we're going to go ahead and show how I fix those too. So get your brake cables back on, nuts on, cotter pins in here, and pretty much done here. I'll cut it back on when we start on the brake lever. Alright guys, we're going to try to get this brake lever loosened up here. You can see it's pretty tight. We do have the cable hooked up, but I'm going to hook it. Start off with, take this cotter pin out, and then there's a little washer behind it. Just pry it down, and then there's really no easy way to get this thing off of here, the brake lever. I did put some lube on it to try to get it loosened up, but we're going to end up taking a hammer and beating the lever down and pull out on the lever all at the same time to try to get it to come out of there. It's going to take me a little bit to get this cotter pin out, so I'll cut the camera back on in just a second. Alright guys, I got that cotter pin out. It didn't actually come out real good, so I ended up breaking off both ends. I'm going to have to get a punch and knock it out. It's got a little washer here to go with it. You want to remove your brake cable. It's going to actually be the lower one here, just to give you some slack, so that you can work this arm up and down. And there's really not, like I said before, there's not an easy way to get this off. I just take the hammer and tap it. Got some lube on there, and it works good if you can take your hand and pull out on that lever as you tap it, and just keep working it back and forth. You can also take a crowbar and stick between it and the frame, and also pry out on it while you're hitting it back and forth to help slide that arm off. This is just going to take some time, so I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I'm going to pull it off, and I'll cut the camera back on once I get it off. Alright guys, this is about 6 hours later. We got the arm off. Alright, so what I normally do is take the cable off of here. You can see this shaft, well, this one's rusted, so I'm going to take the Scotch-Brite wheel and clean that up. This actually got a little groove in there. And what I like to do, slide this, well, just put the arm back up on there and see about where that groove hits. And I'm going to drill and tap a hole in here and put a grease fitting so that you can grease it from now on. I don't know why Honda didn't do that, but it works a whole lot better than what they have here. So I'm going to get this thing cleaned up. I'll tap that, or figure out where I'm going to put the hole, tap a grease fitting in here, and I'll show you the finished product here in a minute. Alright guys, got the grease fitting tapped in here. Kind of about to see where that is. About a ½ inch from the inside, just a regular old standard size 1/4 inch 28 grease fitting. And you want to make sure you keep a fairly short one so that it will still allow the shaft to slide over. That was actually sticking out just a little bit. Hopefully it's going to clear. Slide it back on here. Just like this. Like I said, hopefully it's going to clear. I don't know if it is or not. I may have to back off of this grease fitting just a hair until we get it all the way in there on the groove. There it is. Yeah, now it's on the groove and the grease fitting will tighten up. So next you just want to put your washer on there, wherever it is. Washer here. A new cotter pin. We had a heck of a time getting the old one out of here, and we definitely ain't going to reuse it. Put the new cotter pin on. Your spring back on top of this arm. Goes in here and then goes back here, just like that. Put your cable back in the hole there. And then twist your cotter pin around. Put your cable back in your brake back here with the spring and all that on it. I'm going to grab the grease gun and show you how this thing works. You just stick your grease gun on here, just like that. Pump it up. I already see grease squirting out the side right here. Just like brand new. Actually, that's better than brand new because it's got a grease fitting in it now, so you can keep it greased up. That's one thing Honda doesn't do on any of these bikes, is put grease fittings on anything. And I don't know if there are many places that you really need one, but this spot is one of those. So there you go. That's how you fix the brakes on a Recon. Pretty much a lot of the Honda 4-wheelers like this. Only difference with a Recon is the brakes actually made into the differential. Most of them is separate, but still the same process on freeing up your brake lever, working on your brakes and all that. So check out my other videos, hit the like button, subscribe. Have a good night.